Hello everybody, this is Mr. AP, and today we are going over the AP Psychology free response questions, set 1 and set 2. So, today we're going to start off with set 1, which when I took my AP exam, I had set 1, so I have more input than if I was to do set 2. But hopefully I could explain both of them for you and help you out understanding for maybe if you're taking AP Psych next year, 2024, 2025, or maybe just to go over thinking what you might have got wrong, what you might have got right. So to start it off, we have set 1, question 1. And it reads, Gavin's parents took him to his favorite science museum, and he explored all of the exhibits. One of the interactive exhibits featured glass marbles. He grabbed a large marble and tried to bounce it on the ground. At one point during the visit, he became separated from his parents, and it took a few minutes for them to find him later. Later that night, he drew a colorful picture of the exhibits at the museum. The next day, Gavin brought his picture with him to preschool. While his grandmother drove, Gavin talked to her about the picture. So this has quite a lot of pieces of events, but very little detail to it, which probably comes in later for part A, part B. So to start off with the first question, part A, is we have to explain Jean Piaget's concept of assimilation and how it could relate to Gavin's experience with the glass marble. So first you need to know who Jean Piaget, and he's a developmental psychologist who came up with 4 stages of sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. Which then, those are the 4. Anyways, so then we have to, once you know that, we need to know the main definition of assimilation. Really, you don't need to know Jean Piaget in this question. All you need to know is what he did, which is of assimilation, which is just the cognitive process of making new information fit in with your existing understanding of the world. So that's practically like accommodation, but it's just taking new information instead of switching out or changing new or old information. So to start to this one, we could go to, I think, this sentence, glass marble. We don't even need this first one. We just need the third sentence, where he tried to bounce the ball or the marble onto the ground. So first, we also have to see this as like explain over something like identify. So explain, we have to go more further into information. But to start off, we will need to define assimilation, which is, like stated before, taking new information and processing it into our understanding for the world. So we could probably say that because, as it says here, he tried to bounce, we could assume that maybe he thought the glass marble was a type of bouncy ball. But if you have prior knowledge, you can know that glass marbles kind of suck at bouncing. But anyway, so he grabbed a large marble and then tried to bounce it onto the ground. We could involve assimilation into saying how something like Gavin tried to bounce the ball, but due to not knowing the glass marble does not bounce, he was able to switch that using assimilation into his new knowledge. And that's practically what you could do. You could maybe evolve it in some other way. But that's practically it. Next, we have explain how egocentrism relates to Gavin's car ride with his grandmother. So all you need to know in this one was, what is egocentrism? That egocentrism is basically just selfishness. It's being unable to see from others' perspectives, which I think Jean Piaget also went over this in his pre-operational stage, where people have egocentrism, they don't see from other points of view. Which, when we look at the last sentence, where it's the only section that talks about the grandmother driving and him talking about his picture, we don't really get that much information, which both in 2 ways it helps, but also doesn't. It also doesn't help, where in one way, you could really take this in any way and transform it into any type of reasoning or explaining how it affects, while also, because it gives so little information, it's hard to tell what exactly, like, you can't even tell that has egocentrism, which gives you a lot of flexibility, but also, if you were just to look at it, you could also be super confused with why is there egocentrism. But anyways, like say before, you can't see stuff from a different perspective. So this sentence involves the colorful picture, and then his grandmother's drive. What you can say is something along the lines of, Gavin was super excited about his colorful picture that he talked throughout the whole car ride without letting his grandmother talk, give him a chance to say anything, which makes this egocentrism in Gavin where he only focuses on what he wants to talk about without letting grandmother talk. That's essentially what I said. Now, of course, I just took this AP exam. They just released, I believe, yesterday, so I don't get my score back later. I don't even believe you get your FRQ section back. But yeah, that's essentially what I said. Egocentrism, just he didn't give the grandmother a chance to talk. Next, explain how avoidant attachment could relate to Gavin when he was separated from his parents. So avoidant attachment, there's three different attachment theories. Two of them were insecure and one of them was secure, made by Mary Ainsworth in her experiment with parenting. And basically, you don't need to know Mary Ainsworth, you don't need to know the experiment at all. You just need to know, of course, the definition of avoidant attachment. So what I stated was, of course, usually you want to state, of course, the definition, which was just where the child shows practically no interest in the presence of the parent. Now, what I said was where's the sentence? Separated from his parents, it took a few minutes. It didn't say anything to do with how Gavin had to feel. So using that flexibility, I was just saying Gavin had no effect, no care in the world that his parents left, and he was completely fine. Now, of course, that sounds like a secure attachment or a secure person, but really it's insecure because it has to do with the parenting, not with the child's self. Of course, nothing of this matters. You just need to know avoidant attachment. And you could say something like, when Gavin was separated from parents, this related to his experiments, or he could have avoidant attachment because he just didn't care. He was fine. He just sat there playing with his marble or something. That's really all you need. You don't even need to write a lot. You just need to write 1-2 sentences for each little bullet point for a part. But now we move to next part B. Explain how each of the following terms could relate to Gavin in this scenario. Kind of like the same thing, but you are just given terms, so you're not given anything else. So, because say this first part, we're able to understand simulation is involved with Jean Piaget, while this one we have practically no context clues of any sort. But so we start with the first one, serial position effect. Serial position effect is just a tendency to remember the first and last items in a list better than something in the middle. So this whole question has extreme flexibility, where we could relate this with literally anything you're given. As what I said was, when Gavin entered his favorite science museum, he saw this board of every list, or like a list of every exhibit he's going to go to, and it goes chronological order. And I said Gavin is more likely to remember the first item on that list and the last item on the list more than any of the middle exhibits. That's as far as I had to write. Probably not super detailed, but that's just how I related with him. I involved the science museum, I involved the definition, of superposition effect. That's really all I need. Next, motor cortex. This was part of the parietal lobe in the brain, and really the primary function of the motor cortex is to generate signals to direct the movement of the brain. Super easy. We could find how it relates to the large marble because action, grabbed, and then we could just say motor cortex is the generation of signals to direct movement, and this was used constantly throughout the whole art museum when he was walking, and especially using when he grabbed the marble and dropped it to bounce it. Boom, that's all you need. Next question, moving on. You don't need to spend too much time on these questions. Just restate and apply it. Which applying is probably the hardest part, especially since they give very little detail. Next up, cognitive math. This is just, even if you don't know the term, I don't remember the term, but I just used a map. I know what that is. Cognitive brain probably has to do with understanding the physical environment or remembering the path you took in this, say, in a maze. But basically, if you look up the cognitive map definition, it's just any visual representation of a mental model or just the mental layout of one's physical environment. So since he was at a museum, we could just say when he got lost, maybe instead of the parents walking away, he walked away to this really cool airplane, something like that. And then he got lost. He knows his parents weren't next to him. He used his cognitive map to direct himself back to where he last saw his parents, and then found his parents. Good enough. Sounds good. Next question. Cones and retina. This has to do with when you learn about the eye and cones versus rods things. Cones are basically just color receptors in the eye, which that's really all you need to know for cones. And then I think you don't need to state eye. Maybe you need to state the retina, how they're in the cones are the photoreceptors in the back of the retina. But that's all you need to say is just what they are, color, and then it's used, say when he was doing his colorful picture, his cones were oversatired, I believe, or satisfied, just used a lot. I don't know what the word would be, but his cones were used overstimulated. That's the word. Overstimulated in this one portion when he had to interpret the colors and stuff like that. Just more easy stuff. That's the last of the part B, and we move on to question 2. Question 2 is a study, a case, which is most likely going to happen on every FRQ. You're going to be given something to do with definitions, and then one thing has to do with an experiment, a design, a hypothesis, something to do with studies, cases. Now, question 2 reads, Professor Gonzalez hypothesizes that students will remember more information from his detailed course description if it is printed on yellow paper than if it was to be printed on standard white paper. To test this hypothesis, he puts the name of all of his students into a bowl, then drew out the names to assign them to 2 different groups. He gave one group of students in the class a course description printed on white paper and gave the other group of students a course description printed on yellow paper. Students were instructed to thoroughly read the description outside of class in preparation for their next class. In the next class, he gave all the students a 10-question quiz asking them about the information found on the course description. Professor Gonzalez then compared the number of correct answers for each group of students. The statistically significant results are depicted in the graph, where we see white paper has a mean score of 6 and yellow paper of 10, or 9. I believe that's 9 point something. So, this was an experiment study, stated multiple times, and you're given variables, you're given control. Well, I guess we're going to go into this a little bit later. So, first question, part A. State the operational definition of dependent variable. Operation definition is just like if we know what the dependent variable is, it's the results from manipulating the independent variable. So I guess the mean score of the description is the dependent variable. Operational definition, that's a little bit more confusing, but it just describes the behavior that is observed and measured. So we could just say that the dependent operational definition of the dependent variable was the recall of information, the average recall or mean of the quiz, depending, I guess, obviously, dependent variable, right? But depending on the paper, the color of the paper, which is the independent variable, which I think you should include. It's probably better to include it, but you just need to make sure you say the mean score and of memorization. Next, okay, that was just a state question. You don't really have to write explaining anything. Same thing with the next question, identify the experiment group, which also literally like 3 words. That's all you need to know. But I guess restating the question would be better. So by saying the experiment group to start it off. But first we need to know what experiment group is, and that's the group that receives their variable being tested. So we have to read back in here where it says he puts the name of all the students into all of his students. Boom, that's the people who are getting the variable being tested. That's all we gotta say. The experiment group is all of Professor Gonzalez's students. Done, easy. Next question. So, in addition to manipulation of the independent variable, identify the procedure Professor Gonzalez used to make a study experiment, a true experiment. So, first, you do need to know what a true experiment is, which I included 2 out of the 3, because it says the manipulation, which is the 4th variable. In a true experiment, you need the control, you need a manipulation, a random assignment, and a random selection. So what I stated was that since there's already manipulation, the other variables were the control group and a random assignment, which we could see random assignment when he says, then he drew out names to assign them to different, and he used a name into a bowl, which if you took statistics, you would have more recognition that this is a random assignment type of scenario. But he scrambled all the names and then assigned randomly. And then random selection, I didn't include this, but I don't think it even says random selection. It just says he used all of his students, which I guess that means you're taking the whole population of his students instead of small sample. But anyways, all you need to say is there's a control group of the people who used white paper, and there was a random assignment where he uses the bowl and picks out names randomly. Next question. Explain how the data as presented in the graph does or does not support Professor Gonzalez's hypothesis. So we got to look back at this hypothesis where he says students will remember more information from his detailed course description if it was printed on yellow paper. Now, what does it mean to remember more information? You mean you get a higher score in the quiz. So I made sure to state that because there is 2 steps between the score and what his hypothesis was. So first I said I restated the hypothesis. Then I said by having a higher score on the mean score quiz, it aids better remembrance. And then I said the yellow paper group had a higher score than the white paper group. And then that follows Professor Gonzalez's hypothesis. Boom, next question. Shouldn't be that too much information included, maybe 2-3 sentences since you have to do that 2 steps. Now we move to part B where we have to explain each of the following how they relate to the performance of students' quiz. Now, context dependent memory. This was, where is it? Basically, the context dependent memory refers to the improved recall when the context during encoding is the same as the context during retrieval. Now this question was I understood. I was able to put it down as. I'll tell you the answer, or like what I put down later. But what I didn't understand was when in the experiment it doesn't really tell you what paper was used for the quiz, which would have been much better if it told us, but it didn't. It just told us what each student was given. Now, context dependent memory is basically, yeah, like I said, improved recall when it's the same as the retrieval, where that basically means if, say, we use context dependent memory based on the paper, if we recall or if we retrieve the information or encoded information on yellow paper, it's better retrieval or recall during yellow paper on the quiz because it's the same context of yellow paper. Now, what doesn't make sense on this question, or on this, on number 2, is technically, if there shouldn't be a difference if white paper group was given white paper for when they had to learn the material, and then white paper during the test, and then yellow paper group was given same thing but yellow paper quiz, yellow paper material to learn. So that one's a little iffy, but what I just said was how it could relate to students' performance is because they were given the same color paper, assuming they did, or like assuming that maybe the quiz was just purely on yellow paper, it would make sense for the yellow paper group to do way better because they had the same paper color in the encoding when also taking the quiz. Next question. That was a little difficult. Maybe you could work around. Maybe there's a different answer. Maybe I was completely wrong. Now, next one is Yerkes-Dodson law. This one, since there is literally no like context clues, like context dependent memory, I know what dependent means. I know what context. I know what memory is. I could take it all together, understand, even without knowing the definition. I can understand that it has to do something with depending on your memory. So maybe recall, maybe retrieval, maybe encoding. It has to do something with memory. Has to do with depending on context, I guess. So yeah, you could understand like that. But Yerkes-Dodson law is just purely memorization. Now this is the graph of arousal, where there's an optimal level of arousal for taking, or like for stress, I believe. Now, what you could write down is, this one I actually didn't know. I don't think I wrote it correctly, so I'm gonna have to pull up a graph real quick. So, if we look at a picture, okay, so I believe you could see that. Yeah, this picture that's selected, as you have better performance at the optimal level of stress or of arousal. So, we're right here. So maybe we could say, like, this doesn't even have to do anything to do with paper. We could just say, maybe the student was stressed. Maybe they had so much stress that they just did bad on the quiz. Or maybe they were so relaxed on the quiz or on the material that they just didn't worry at all, and then they underperformed. That's all you need to say. Probably restate Yerkes-Dodson law, or say that it is a curve of arousal for performance on a specific task. Boom. Done. Next question. Now, lower level of the big 5 trait of conscientiousness. This was also memorization because it's just involved with I don't even know. It's just involved with like the big 5 traits, right? You have to know those, and I'm just gonna pull it up right here. Boom. If right here it says the big 5 ocean, if you want to learn or memorize that type of acronym. But conscientiousness, lower score, impulsive, careless, disorganized. So you're most likely to be just forgetful, unfocused, not super on it, right? So, whoa, that's the wrong one. So if you have a lower level of Big Five trait, that's just disorganized. You're not gonna maybe if you have lower level, you're probably gonna be disorganized, unfocused, and do worse on the quiz, which again does not relate anything to do with the color of the paper. So even if like say you just skip this whole question or just understanding, or like yeah you could just skip this whole question. Notice that's performance on the quiz. Boom. This means that they're, like I said, unfocused, disorganized, and then we could be like, oh, it's probably gonna make them do worse on the quiz. Probably restate this and then say how it hinders their performance, and then done. Question. Boom. You finished the whole FRQ. Great. Now let's move on to set 2. As stated earlier, I didn't do set 2, but I think I could still aid in performance or understanding. So, question 1. Claire's sports team made it to the championship basketball game. To play the game, teammates will need to work together to move a ball toward their own goal. They must then aim carefully to throw the ball into a hoop that is elevated above 10 feet off the ground. The winner of the team is the team that gets the ball into the hoop the most times. This is a crappy question. So, like, I mean, it's not a crappy question. It's just like, you don't need to know this. You don't need that. You probably don't even need this. Like, maybe this one part where you have to carefully aim. This last part is nothing to do that you need to know first. So you could just skim through it and then go straight to the questions. Or you just need to know it's basketball probably. Explain how each of the following might help Claire to be successful during a game. Now, retinal disparity. Basically, what is that? That is so retinal disparity is retinal eye disparity, like dye too, or just how they're not focused. Well, okay, the definition is the fact that the left and right fields of the vision provide slightly different, because the eyes are not directly on top of each other, different visual images when focusing on a single object. So, if, say Claire, okay, so I guess define what that is, but then you could just say Claire is, when she's shooting the ball, she needs to focus on the hoop, and if she has really good vision, really good retinal disparity, and understanding the distance, because it is a way of telling distance. If she has a really good retinal disparity, she could shoot the ball into the hoop better by just knowing or like understanding where the hoop is in proximity to her, and then score more points to win. So I guess maybe that last sentence was important because you just needed to clarify successfulness means to win, which is to shoot more balls into the hoop. But yeah, it's like that last part. It's definitely gonna be graded how you apply it, not really what you say. Now, second question, intrinsic motivation. Motivation is probably the key word you could use as an intrinsic. There's two of these. There's X and in. Intrinsic is just your internal motivation to do better or for personal gain. It's just the motivation is the idea of doing something for one's personal gain. So we could say, so obviously after you restate it, you could say, oh, Claire, she wants to win the game because her dad's going to give her $1,000 because it's some championship. I don't know. Whatever. So just something like that. It doesn't even have to do, like, because it's intrinsic, it doesn't have to do for the group's goal. It's for her own personal gain. So maybe doing this affects her in her personal life. Like I said, her dad gives her $1,000 that she could spend on something random. So yeah, I guess that's all you need to write down. It's really just the applying part for all the FRQs that you need to understand. But anyways, next question, social facilitation. So this is the theory that people perform better in, or maybe worse, but mainly better in the performance in the presence of others, like an audience. So since there's a game going on, you could assume that there's going to be an audience. And then say Claire has positive social facilitation, where she will perform better in front of this audience because it's some big game, blah 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 blah. Again, restate the question. All you gotta say is just the definition, and then apply it like that, like I just said. Next, kinesthetic sense. That is just the senses. I think, yeah, it's just the senses of body movement or position, and being aware of only on introspection. So this, I believe, was involved when we had to learn about the intelligences, where there's 8 intelligences involving spatial, musical, linguistic, introspective, introspective, or this, yeah, introspective. I can't remember them all on top of my head, but something like that. So, say she has extremely good kinesthetic sense. She's probably, so after defining what that is, you could imply this by saying, oh, she has really good kinesthetic sense, so she could move around swiftly and throw the ball with proper form into the hoop perfectly. Should be about good enough. Next question. Part B. So now we're given Claire's team won the championship. 10 years later, the team gets together for reunion at the gym where the game was originally held. At the reunion, they discuss the championship game. So, different style of the question compared to part A, but you're still given some definition you gotta say, and then apply it. Explain how each of the following might influence Claire's recollection. So, given, let's say part A, or not part A, number 1 for part B, context dependent memory. We stated this before in set 1, but obviously, if you're taking set 2, you're not taking set 1. So, context dependent memory, I'll just restate it again, but it's the, wait, so yeah, there's question 2. Alright, it's just how memory refers to improved recall when the context during encoding is the same as the context during retrieval. So, Claire's recollection, since it says right here at the game, was where the game was originally held. Claire would, if she's trying, since it's 10 years, most people will probably forget small details and have maybe 1, 2, no, more, probably like 2 or 3. I mean, I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't even matter. It's just, all you need to know is the definition, and then you could say, context-dependent memory is this, and it affects Claire's recollection of the game because she's in the same gym as she was when she took the game, so she's going to recall information much better. And then, yeah, it should be good for that question. Next is self-serving bias. Self-serving bias, you need to know that. I think this is part of Unit 9. I believe next year, however, the psychology exam will change, and the general units will also change. So this might be part of the last, it's whatever it is, it's part of the last unit in social psychology. Now, self-serving bias is the tendency to attribute our success to internal or personal factors and our failures to external situational factors. So what this means is that, say Claire was taking a shot and she made it. Perfect, swift, no errors. That would mean, and if she was using a self-serving bias, she said, "Oh, I did a great throw because I'm a fantastic member of this team. I'm really skillful, blah, 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 blah." But if she says she fails, or like she missed a shot, she'd be like, "Oh, I got I got fouled." And yeah, just external factors, not saying that she did bad because she is unskillful. She's just saying external factors. That's just more definition. You don't have to explain any of that. Now, to apply this, now you could just say in her recollection, Claire remembers how she did fantastic and had no errors to her own performance. The only error in the game was when she, like whenever she missed, she just blamed it on the other team fouling her or something like yeah, something like that. There's not much you could really say there, as because self-serving bias doesn't really have that much to do with recollection. But you could try to be flexible and just in a way just tell it, just define it, define it and apply it, and then that's just how she remembers it. Retroactive interference. That's the last question in part B. So we were given an acronym which isn't very family friendly, but basically when you're given it, proactive interference is where old blocks new information. So there's no point in explaining that. Retroactive information is where new information blocks old ones. So say you have this friend's number you remember for multiple years, and then you move to a different city and you are given a different friend's number or different phone number. This new information of this new phone number will block or make it harder to remember the old information. So say this old information was 912. That's their number. Then you go to this new city and you figure out someone's number is 108. And then say you're trying to remember this or like remember that old city person's number of 912. It's going to be much harder because this new information of 108, it just blocks it. So that's just how I'm trying to explain or the definition. Now how it affects Claire's recollection of the game. Say maybe throughout those 10 years, she joined a different team and she went to another championship. This new championship, since it was much closer to the present, could block this old championship game. So maybe when she's trying to recall the memories, she goes back to this more present, more recent game, and she falsely says something happens in that 10 year ago game that never actually happened. And that is part B for question 1. Now we can move on to question set 2. I just want to check something real quick on how, because maybe I might be wrong on this self-serving bias. So if I go basically I'm just looking at how does self-serving bias affect memory. So it says individuals show inferior recall of negative feedback about themselves, but unimpaired recollection of self-related negative feedback. Okay, so basically this just means that like individuals may like retain negative information, but forget that it's associated with oneself. So just they remember that. So say Claire. Let's just go back. Let's say Claire missed a shot, right, and she got fouled. Maybe she remembers the shot was the game-winning shot. Maybe, but she won't remember that she was the one who shot it and she missed. Or well, I guess she won. So maybe it was the last shot of the game. She could have earned another 3 extra points, and she shot and it missed. She remembers the shot missing, but the self-serving bias, because it was her fault and her negative action, she'll probably forget it as it was hers and it was just some type of error. Maybe it was a different teammate. But yeah, that's just how I guess self-serving bias would affect that. Now, I stated this earlier. Let's go back. Let's go do question 2 now. This is another experiment, case study, something. So Question 2 reads, Dr. Dawson is a psychologist who believes that students who read motivational statements before a test will experience lower levels of anxiety as compared with students who read neutral statements. To examine this belief, he conducted a study. In the study, he randomly assigned half of the participants to read motivational statements and the other half to read neutral statements. Immediately after reading the statements, all of the students completed a survey about the current level of anxiety. 1 equals low, 8 equals high. Then took the test. Dr. Dawson found statistically significant results that depicted in the graph. So, given the graph, the motivational statements had less anxiety than neutral statements. So, part A. State a valid operational definition of the dependent variable of the study. In the study. So, as stated before, it is the variable that is being measured or tested in experiment, and it's based on behavior. So we could say dependent variable is the score of anxiety, and anxiety, I guess, is a behavior. So all we have to say is the operational definition, restate the question, because it's a state question, but I think it's just important to restate the question no matter what. But state a valid operational definition, so we could say the operational definition of the dependent variable in this study is the score of anxiety of the students, I believe. Yeah, students after after they receive motivational or neutral statements. Next question. Identify the control group in the study. Now I feel like the control group wasn't really a control group. Now, if we restate it, it's the control group is an experiment a control group is a group in an experiment which a variable is not being tested. So we're only given 2 groups, and if it says identify, there is a control group. However, it just doesn't feel like, because the motivational ones, it follows the hypothesis that students who read motivational, so that's the dependent variable, or that's the one you want to manipulate. But the neutral statements is control group. It just doesn't feel right because that's getting the statements also feels like a variable, but it's neutral, so I guess the neutral part is the no variable part. Anyways, all you gotta say here is the control group was the neutral statement group. Done. Literally, yeah, identify probably one of my favorites, because you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to say what a control group is. You just gotta tell them the answer, Alright, question 3. Explain why this study would be considered an experiment. So, it says, where is it? Randomly assigned. Perfect. That's one of the 4. We need manipulation, random assignment, random selection, and there has to be a control group. So, I mean, not only, I guess, we could infer that this is a control group, but it also just tells us in the question that there is a control group. So that's 2 of 4. Now, why is it so random? So we gotta state. I don't think we had to explain what an experiment is, but we probably should by saying a true experiment is something that includes, or it's a study that includes manipulation, control, random assignment, and random selection. Dr. Dawson, this is a true experiment now, so we stated what it was. This is true because Dr. Dawson includes random assignment. You don't have to explain how she includes it. I think you just explain that she does use it. And then you have to say that there's a control group of neutral statements. Then random selection, half the parts. So I guess, I think random assignment does infer random selection, possibly, but I guess there's really no random assignment that's taking place. It just skips to the sample, or maybe it is population. Maybe it's all of his students, like we used in set 1. But I guess you could probably, I never stated random selection. I just said there's random assignment. I will just in case though, I will look it up. Does random assignment infer random selection? Probably not. Yeah, it doesn't infer, but there's nowhere that it says that there is random selection. So I think your best bet is just to say there was random selection, and then say that, and then just move on to random assignment. However, yeah, I'm actually kind of lost here myself. There's just nowhere it says random selection. So I guess we could maybe just infer that she's selecting the whole population or the sample. So let's go with that. But anyways, the next one we have is control. We said random assignment, random selection, manipulation. The manipulation is shown because she's giving independent and dependent variables. Which, yeah, independent, there's two groups. It's not just one. She's manipulating what group gets motivational versus what gets neutral. Next question. Explain how the results do or do not support Dr. Dawson's hypothesis. So just like set one, what we're gonna do is we're gonna state the hypothesis and say, or does it say, who read motivational statements before a test will experience lower levels of anxiety. So then when we look at the graph, we can see that the group with motivational statements have less anxiety versus those with neutral statements. And then I think that's all you have to say. Restate the hypothesis, show that, look what the statistically significant results are, and then link the two by just saying, because like last time on set one we had to do a two-step process, but here we don't have to because her hypothesis or his hypothesis directly states lower levels of anxiety, which right here shows. We could just say motivational statements had lower levels of anxiety compared to neutral statements, which is what Dr. Dawson's hypothesis was. Perfect. Next question. Part B. The test Dr. Dawson gave was a vocabulary test. Explain how the following terms might relate to students who perform poorly on the test in the study. So first, external locus of control. What is that? That is where people believe that they are, or people that believe that as opposed to external forces, have control over the outcome of events in their lives. So, right? I believe it's. I'll look it up once more. That doesn't feel right, but maybe it is. So, control stems from external forces. Okay, maybe that was wrong. But yeah, so that would probably make sense if we just look at it. External control. So it seems like there's control from external factors. So people believe that that there's outside forces that control them. So maybe if they were to get, because what's especially about this is this question in part B, how it relates to students who perform poorly. So it's not saying how does it hinder a student's performance. It says like the performance of people who did poorly. So we have to look into how it decreased or negatively affected them, which does kind of, which will be a little bit, I think, talked about a little bit later, because in one of these questions it is much more confusing if you don't notice that. But anyways, the external locus of control, for the students who perform poorly, they could just say like maybe they had more anxiety, so they could be like, I was just more stressed, maybe it could be like a self-serving bias where it wasn't even their fault, it was that the test was hard or the quiz was hard, and they were probably doomed from the start, especially if they have non-motivational and they were super stressed. Yeah, that would make more sense. If they were more stressed, they're gonna think more negatively, and they're gonna have like blank thoughts or like too many thoughts rushing in at once. It's just gonna affect them more, and it's gonna be less. They're gonna be less focused, more disorganized, and that's practically it, I assume. So yeah, how do we answer the question? it would restate what that would mean. The external locus of control is how someone would believe that there's external factors to their outcome. And then we could say, because they had so much more anxiety, they did really badly on the test. Looking back at it, they could say that it wasn't quite them. It was more of a, they were doomed from the start. They were so stressed out that it makes sense they failed, or not failed, did poorly on the test or quiz test. Yeah. So next is stage 1 of Selye's general adaptation syndrome. Now this one is purely memorization. First of all, you need to know the stages, and then you need to know, maybe you don't need to know who Selye's was, but the general adaptation syndrome, which actually I will pull up a thing. Where is it? Yeah. All right, I'll just pull up a graph. Okay, so it's this graph right here, where we see that the stage 1 is the alarm stage. This was, I think, I can't remember when this was learned about, but stress occurs. There's two more stages after that. We don't have to look into that. All we have to know is that during this one loop where there's low resistance, which is you're more likely to get affected by, say, your immune system's weaker, so you're more be affected by, say, disease, a virus, a cold, fever, something, sickness. And then from here, where are we? How it affect or relates to students who perform poorly. Maybe they did poorly because they were so alarmed by this test. Maybe they were so stressed that they just were so stressed they couldn't focus. Because basically when stressors activate, they release hormone. The alarm system, stage 1, which we should probably include that it is the alarm stage. When we are in this stage, we release hormones, the fight or flight hormones, which activates adrenaline, and which also could lead to being stressed out. But once you get to the second stage, we don't have to talk about this, but second stage you get more calm because you have more resistance. But adrenaline also does help. It could make you more focused, but we're not trying to talk about how it relates to them doing good, because it says they did bad. So we have to look at really how the stress affects them. And when you get stressed, that could lead to racing thoughts or going blank and having difficulty concentrating. So what we could say is in stage 1, so you have to practically all of this, but stage 1, you could say stage 1 of this general adaptation syndrome is where the student is stressed. They are in the alarm stage, and due to the stressors, they follow unfocusedness and difficulty concentrating, which those are both negative things, which then made them do worse on the test. This question 2 has nothing to do with memory, so you don't have to include anything with recalling, retrieving, encoding when they were learning, when they were studying. You don't have to do anything about that. So there's no use in diving into that. Last question, part B, crystallized intelligence. This you don't really have context clues other than intelligence. But crystallized intelligence is just where it's just like intelligence of someone's general knowledge, vocabulary, and reasoning based off acquired information. So this, I guess, will have to do with studying, but you don't really need to say. All you gotta say, restate it, of course, every time. Maybe restate the question, but restate what the definition is. So you gotta define the vocab word. Then you could just apply it in some way. Most of these FRQs are just flexible enough where you can apply it in any way you want. But what I would say is how the students who did poorly most likely had worse crystallized intelligence because they just didn't have enough knowledge. They didn't have sense. They didn't understand. They didn't know the material, so they just did worse. And then, of course, you stated what crystallized intelligence is. Now that, I believe, is the last question. Yep. End of exam. So that is 2024 AP Psych free response questions, set 1 and set 2. With Mr. AP, my interpretations of what the answer should be like. Shouldn't be exactly, because it's not like there's a definite answer. But that is it. Hopefully this does help you in any way. And of course, I would very much appreciate if you liked, follow, or subscribed, leave a comment, whatever helped, whatever you misunderstood, misinterpreted, whatever you need help on. And thank you.